They traded her like property, until fate dragged her into a war where love had no place, yet found her anyway. What happens when the only man who sees your soul is the one the world calls your enemy? Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The worn floorboards of the Brennan cabin groaned under Clara's bare feet as she swept the same corner for the third time that morning. Outside, the Kansas wind rattled the loose shutters, a sound she'd grown accustomed to over her 23 years. The broom's bristles were nearly gone, much like everything else in this place, worn down to nothing, barely holding together. CL. Her father's voice boomed from the front room, thick with last night's whiskey. Get in here, girl. She set the broom against the wall with practiced care and smoothed her patched calico dress. Thomas Brennan sat slouched in his chair, an empty bottle at his feet and cards scattered across the table. The acrid smell of tobacco and stale liquor hung heavy in the air. Yes, Pa. That McCarty fellow's coming by this afternoon. He didn't look at her, just studied his hands, as if they held answers to questions he'd never ask. You make yourself presentable. Clara's stomach tightened. Not again. Pa, you said last time. I said nothing that matters now. His bloodshot eyes finally met hers, cold and calculating. Man's willing to take you off my hands. Maybe forgive some of what I owe him from last week's game. But Mr. Hayworth was supposed to Hayworth found himself a prettier gal in Dodge City, one whose father ain't drowning and dead. Thomas spat tobacco juice into a tin can, missing by inches. The brown stain on the floor was just one of many. You're getting long in the tooth. Clara can't be picky. Clara's hands clenched in her skirts. Mr. Horth had courted her for 3 months, bringing wild flowers and speaking of a small farm near the river. She darned his socks and mended his shirts, allowed him to kiss her cheek beneath the cottonwood tree. Then he'd vanished without a word, leaving only rumors and her father's bitter laughter. How much do you owe Mr. McCarty? She asked quietly. Enough that he's interested in alternative payment. Thomas stood swaying slightly. You'll do as you're told. She retreated to her small room, hardly bigger than a closet. The cracked mirror showed a face she'd grown to hate. Angular features that men called sharp, pale skin that freckled too easily. Hair the color of dried wheat that never held a curl. Her mother had been beautiful once before poverty, and Thomas Brennan had worn her down. Clara saw none of that beauty in herself. From her window, she could see the Garrett family's wagon rolling past. Mrs. Garrett sat beside her husband, their 3 children in the back, heading to town for supplies. A normal family, a loving family. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass and wondered what that felt like. By afternoon, she'd changed into her least mended dress and attempted to tame her hair. When Samuel McCarty arrived, she served coffee with steady hands, while the men discussed her like livestock. She's a good worker, Thomas was saying. Knows her place quiet-like. McCarty, a man of 40 with graying temples and hands that had seen hard labor, looked her over with the same expression he might use for a horse. Bit scrawny. Can she have children? Her mother birthed 5 before the fever took her. Clara, here's got the hips for it. She stood against the wall, invisible, yet exposed, as they negotiated her worth. Marty owned a failing general store and needed someone to work it without wages. A wife would do nicely. I'll think on it, McCarty finally said, tipping his hat to her without meeting her eyes. Got other options to consider. After he left, Thomas turned on her. You stood there like a fence post. Would it kill you to smile, show some charm? You told me to be quiet, Clara said carefully. Quiet don't mean dead. He slumped back in his chair. We'll see if he comes back. If not, there's always old Pete at the saloon. He's been asking after you." Old Pete was 60 if he was a day with yellow teeth and wandering hands. Clara's heart sank further. That night, she lay in her narrow bed, listening to her father's snores and the coyotes howling in the distance. She thought of her mother's stories about love. How she'd met Thomas at a church social, how handsome he'd been in his soldier's uniform, how he'd promised her the world before the war changed him. Before the whiskey took hold, before the cards became his only love. Clara had watched other girls in town get courted properly. She'd seen Benjamin Taylor carry Anna Morrison's packages and walk her home from church. She had watched John Spencer build a whole house for Mary Patterson before proposing. Those girls had fathers who valued them, who wouldn't trade them for gambling debts. But Clara, she was currency, a burden to be passed off to whoever would take her. The next morning brought Walter Worth to town with his new bride, a petite blonde, who laughed like bells and wore a dress that hadn't seen a single patch. Clara watched from behind the church. After services, saw how he helped his wife into the wagon, how he looked at her like she held the sun itself. He'd looked at Clara once for a fleeting moment before he'd calculated her worth and found it wanting. "Don't know why you torture yourself," Martha Coleman said, coming up beside her. Martha was the pastor's daughter, kind enough but naive about the world's cruelties. There'll be other men like McCarty or old Pete. Clara couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Martha flushed. "I'm sure God has a plan. God's plan seems to involve me being bartered like a sack of flour." Clara turned away. "Forgive me, I shouldn't speak so." But that night Marty returned. This time he brought a $1 store ring and a proposition. Thomas, deep in his cups and deeper in debt, accepted on her behalf. "Congratulations, daughter," he slurred. "You're engaged. Wedding's next month." Clara looked at McCarty's weathered face, his calculating eyes, and felt nothing. No joy, no despair, just empty. "Thank you," she said. "Because what else was there?" McCarty nodded curtly. "You'll move your things to the store after the ceremony. Plenty of work needs doing." After he left, Clara stood on the porch watching the stars. Somewhere out there, perhaps, were women who married for love. Women whose fathers protected them instead of selling them. Women who were treasured. But not here, not her. "I have never known love," she whispered to the vast Kansas sky. The wind carried her words away into nothing, just like everything else in her life. The next few weeks passed in preparation. Clara sewed her wedding dress from flour sacks, bleached white as she could manage. The women in town offered tight smiles and pitying looks. Everyone knew Thomas Brennan's debts. Everyone knew why Samuel McCarty had suddenly decided he needed a wife. "You're fortunate, miss," Henderson told her while fitting the dress. "Many girls your age are already spinsters. McCarty's a decent man, works hard, doesn't drink much." Clara nodded, letting them convince themselves that this was a blessing. But at night, she dreamed of somewhere else, somewhere far from Kansas, from debts and loveless arrangements. Somewhere she might be more than a burden to be bartered. The week before the wedding, she made her decision. She would go west. She'd heard talk of wagon trains heading to California, Oregon, anywhere but here. She could work, cook, clean, tend. Anything was better than becoming Samuel McCarty's unpaid laborer, bearing children for a man who looked at her like livestock. She had no illusions about finding love. That dream had died with every man who'd passed her over for prettier, wealthier girls. But maybe she could find peace. Maybe she could find a place where being unloved didn't define her worth. Under cover of darkness, she began to prepare. Come morning, Clara Brennan would disappear into the vast American frontier, carrying nothing but her mother's Bible. and the certainty that whatever lay ahead couldn't be worse than what she left behind. She was wrong about many things, but she was right about one. Her life was about to change in ways she'd never imagined. The wagon train stretched like a dusty serpent across the prairie, 23 wagons strong and heading west toward promises none of them could guarantee. Clara had joined them in Independence, Missouri, offering her services in exchange for passage. The wagon master, a gruff man named Josiah Mills, had looked her over with skeptical eyes before nodding toward the Patterson family's wagon. They lost their eldest girl to fever last month, could use help with the young ones. He'd said, "You pull your weight, you can travel with us." That had been 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of endless plains, choking dust, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion she'd never known in Kansas, but also 3 weeks of freedom from her father's house. From McCarty's calculating gaze, from a future that had felt like a noose tightening around her neck. The Patterson family consisted of Eugene and Dorothy, both in their 40s, and their 4 remaining children, ranging from 6 to 14. They were kind enough, though grief still shadowed Dorothy's eyes when she looked at Clara, working in what had been her daughter's place. "You're doing fine, dear," Dorothy would say, patting Clara's shoulder as she struggled with the cook fire or wrestled the younger children into compliance. But Clara could hear the unspoken words. "You're not her. You'll never be her." Still, it was better than what she'd left behind. Here at least her labor had purpose beyond settling someone else's debts. The evening routine had become familiar. Help prepare supper over the communal fires, tend to the children, mend what needed mending, then collapse onto her bedroll beneath the wagon. But this night felt different. The air hung heavy with more than prairie heat, and conversations around the fires carried an undertone of worry. Scouts saw Apache signs 2 days back. She heard Mr. Mills telling the men, "We're skirting the edge of their territory. Stay vigilant." Clara had heard stories of Indian attacks. Of course, everyone had. But out here under the vast dome of stars, those stories felt more real than they ever had in Kansas. She pulled her thin blanket tighter and tried not to think about it. Around the largest fire families gathered as they did most evenings. The Hendersons had brought out their fiddle, and young couples danced despite their exhaustion. Clara sat apart darning one of Tommy Patterson's shirts by firelight when she heard the women talking. "Marriage is such a blessing," Sarah Morrison was saying, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "James tells me every day how grateful he is that I agreed to marry him. Can you imagine him grateful to me?" The other married women laughed and shared their own stories. Tales of courtship, of nervous proposals, of wedding nights filled with tenderness. Clara's needle stilled as she listened to familiar ache building in her chest. "What about you?" Clara Mary Stewart called over. "You must have had beaus back in Kansas. Pretty girl like you?" The lie came easily. "I was too busy helping my father." She forced a smile. "Never had much time for courting?" "Well, plenty of single men in California." Mary winked. "You'll find someone." Clara nodded and returned to her sewing. But her hands trembled. These women spoke of love like it was as natural as breathing, as sure as sunrise. They'd been chosen, cherished, wanted. Their husbands had seen them as prizes to be won, not burdens to be borne. Later, when the camp had settled into sleep, Clara lay wakeful beneath the wagon. The stars seemed impossibly bright out here, unmarred by town lights or coal smoke. She found herself whispering to them as she'd done that last night in Kansas. "I have never known love." The words came easier, now admitted to the darkness. "No one has ever looked at me the way James looks at Sarah. No one has ever been grateful that I existed." The prairie wind carried no answers, only the distant howl of coyotes and the soft snoring of the Patterson children. Clara closed her eyes and tried to imagine what it would feel like to be loved. To have someone's face light up when she entered a room, to be held like something precious instead of tolerated like something necessary. But imagination failed her. How could she envision something she'd never experienced, never seen directed at her? It would be like trying to imagine a color that didn't exist. The next morning brought trouble. One of the oxmen had gone lame and the train had to slow its pace. Tension rippled through the group as they fell further behind schedule. Every delay meant greater risk of getting caught by early winter snows in the mountains. Clara was helping Dorothy with the washing when they heard the commotion. Riders approaching from the east. Not Indians, but white men, ruffle-looking sorts that made even the hardened pioneers nervous. Bounty hunters, Eugene Patterson muttered, checking his rifle. Looking for runaway slaves, most likely, or anyone else they can claim fits a description. The riders circled the camp asking questions. Clara kept her head down, scrubbing clothes with focused intensity. But she could feel eyes on her. That one there, a growly voice said, "The blonde. She matches a description we got." Clara's heart stopped. Had her father sent men after her, or McCarty? What description would that be? Josiah Mills stepped forward. Several other men flanking him. Runaway bride from Kansas. Father's offering a reward for her return. Says she stole from him before lighting out. Stole from him. Clara almost laughed, as if she'd ever had anything to steal. "Don't know nothing about any runaway brides," Mills said evenly. "All our people are accounted for." The bounty hunter dismounted, walking closer. Clara could smell the whiskey and trail dust on him. "Mind if I ask her myself?" "I do mind." Dorothy Patterson suddenly spoke up, moving to stand beside Clara. "This is my cousin's daughter. Been with us since independence." "You're mistaken." Other women gathered around, forming a protective wall. Even those who barely knew Clara closed ranks. The bounty hunter found himself facing a united front of frontier women, and something in their eyes made him step back. "Maybe so," he said finally. "But if we find out different, you won't," Mills said firmly. "Now move along. We've got ground to cover." After they left, Clara's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the washing. Dorothy touched her shoulder gently. "Whatever you're running from, dear, it's your business. But you're one of us now. We protect our own." Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. It wasn't love what these people offered, but it was something. Acceptance, protection, more than she'd ever had before. That night she helped prepare supper with renewed energy when young Betty Patterson asked her to tell a story. Clara found herself sharing one of her mother's tales, a happy one from before everything went wrong. The children listened with wide eyes, and even some adults drew closer. "You tell that real nice," old William Turner said afterward. "Got a gift for it." A gift? Clara tucked the words away like treasures. Maybe she didn't have beauty or wealth or a father's love, but maybe she had something. The attack came 3 days later. They just finished the noon meal when the scouts came racing back, shouting warnings. Apache warriors moving fast, heading their way. The camp erupted into controlled chaos. Men grabbing weapons, women hurrying children into the wagon circles, everyone moving with practiced urgency. "CL, get the children inside," Eugene shouted, already taking position with his rifle. She grabbed Betty and Tommy, pushing them toward the wagon. Martha and John, the older two, helped her boost the young ones up. The air filled with war cries and gunfire dust and confusion. Clara had never been so terrified in her life. But she held the children close, whispering prayers and promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Outside, the battle raged, shots, fired arrows, whistling men shouting orders and warnings. Then she heard Dorothy scream. Without thinking, Clara peered out. Dorothy had been caught in the open, trying to reach extra ammunition. An Apache warrior bore down on her. Tomahawk raised. "Stay here." Clara ordered the children, then scrambled out of the wagon. She didn't remember grabbing the cast iron skillet. Didn't remember running. Only remembered the solid weight of it connecting with the warrior's skull, dropping him just feet from Dorothy. "Get back to cover," someone yelled. Clara hauled Dorothy to her feet, half dragging her toward safety. An arrow whistled past so close she felt the wind of it. Another warrior appeared from the dust, and Clara raised the skillet again, ready to fight. But this one didn't attack. He stared at her for a long moment. A young man, perhaps her age, with eyes that seemed to see straight through her. Then he turned and melted back into the chaos. The attack ended as suddenly as it began. The Apache retreated, leaving behind fallen on both sides. The pioneers had held, but at a cost. 3 men dead, several wounded, supplies scattered and destroyed. "You saved my life." Dorothy wept, clutching Clara's hands. "You could have stayed safe with the children, but you came for me. Anyone would have." "No." Eugene gripped her shoulder, his eyes suspiciously moist. "Not anyone. You're a brave woman, Clara. Braver than you know." That night, as they buried their dead and tended their wounded, Clara found herself at the center of something new. People who'd barely noticed her before now smiled and nodded. Men tipped their hats. Women pressed her hands. She'd proven herself in fire and blood-shown courage she hadn't known she possessed. But as she lay beneath the wagon again, Clara thought of that Apache warrior who'd spared her, the one who'd looked at her with something almost like recognition. She wondered if he too knew what it was like to be alone, to move through life unmed from love. "Perhaps none of us really know love," she whispered to the stars. "Perhaps we're all just searching for it, white and Apache alike." The wind offered no arguments, and Clara finally slept the prairie stars, standing witness to her small epiphany. She was still unloved, still alone in the ways that mattered most. But she was alive. She was free, and maybe that was enough for now. The second attack came at dawn, 10 days after the first. This time there was no warning. Clara woke to screaming and the thunder of hooves. The camp erupted in chaos. Warriors everywhere, arrows finding their marks, families scattering in panic. She grabbed Betty and Tommy, pushing them beneath the wagon. "Stay down!" she shouted over the den. Eugene Patterson was already firing from behind a water barrel. Dorothy crouched nearby, reloading for him, but there were too many attackers coming from all sides. The wagon train's defenses, strong against a frontal assault, crumbled under the coordinated attack. Clara saw James Morrison fall, an arrow in his chest. His pregnant wife Sarah screamed, trying to reach him. A warrior grabbed her, dragging her toward a waiting horse. "The children," Dorothy gasped, seeing Clara. "Get them out. Run for the ravine." But there was nowhere to run. Warriors surrounded them, cutting off escape routes. Clara watched in horror as families were torn apart. Wagons set ablaze, their carefully ordered world destroyed in minutes. A hand grabbed her shoulder. She spun, raising the knife she'd taken to keeping close, but stopped short. It was the same warrior from before, the young one who'd spared her. His face was painted for war now, but his eyes held the same strange recognition. He said something in Apache, gesturing urgently when she didn't move. He pointed at the Patterson children, then at himself, making what seemed to be promises of safety. No, Clara said firmly, stepping between him and the wagon. No, an older warrior shouted something sharp. The young man responded, gesturing at Clara. An argument erupted between them, even as the battle raged around them. Finally, the younger warrior grabbed Clara's wrist, his grip firm, but not painful. She fought him using the knife her nails anything. But he was stronger, and her struggles were hampered by her skirts and exhaustion. He dodged her wild swings, speaking continuously in Apache, his tone almost pleading. Then Eugene Patterson appeared, rifle raised. The young warrior moved faster than thought, knocking the weapon aside. The two men grappled, rolling in the dust. Clara scrambled for the fallen rifle, but before she could reach it, she heard the sickening crack of bone. Eugene lay still, his neck at an unnatural angle. No! Dorothy's scream pierced the air. She ran toward her husband's body, but other warriors intercepted her. Everything after that blurred together. The children crying, Dorothy fighting like a wild cat, until a blow to the head stopped her, the systematic looting of wagons, the rounding up of survivors, mostly women and children, as few men had survived the assault. Clara found herself herded with the others, hands bound, stumbling across the prairie. Behind them, smoke rose from the burning wagons. Everything they'd carried west, all their hopes and dreams, reduced to ash. She kept looking for the Patterson children, but couldn't see them in the group. Her heart hammered with fear for them, for all of them. Stories of what happened to white captives filled her mind, each more terrible than the last. They walked for hours under the burning sun. No water, no rest. Some of the women wept continuously. Others, like Clara, had retreated into shocked silence. Her feet bled through her worn shoes, but she kept moving, knowing that to fall behind meant death. As evening approached, they reached an Apache camp. Clara had expected something primitive, but the organization surprised her. Wiki-ups arranged in patterns, horses choraled efficiently, the bustle of a functioning community. The captives were separated. Clara tried to stay with the other women, but the young warrior from before she'd heard others call him Kenya took her arm, leading her away. She fought again, but exhaustion and thirst had stolen her strength. He brought her to a wiki upset, slightly apart from the others. An elderly woman sat outside working on basket weaving. She looked up at their approach, her weathered face unreadable. Kana spoke at length in Apache. The woman, clearly someone of importance, studied Clara throughout, occasionally interrupting with questions. Finally, she nodded and gestured for Clara to sit. No, Clara said, though her legs trembled with fatigue. I want to go back to the others. The old woman surprised her by speaking English. You sit, you fall down anyway. Clara's knees buckled as if on cue. She sank onto the ground, past caring about dignity. The woman handed her a water gourd. Clara hesitated, then drank greedily. I am Nalin, the woman said, Kana's grandmother. He says you are brave, says you fought for the woman, protected the children. Where are they? Clara's voice cracked. The Patterson children safe. Other family take them. Nan studied her with dark, knowing eyes. Kana says you are different. Says the spirits marked you. I don't understand. No, you wouldn't. Nan returned to her weaving. You rest now. Tomorrow you work. Kana had disappeared during this exchange. Now he returned, carrying a bundle. He set it before Clara. A blanket, some kind of food wrapped in cloth, and strips of soft leather. For feet, Nan explained, pointing at Clara's bloody shoes. Clara Ara stared at the offerings, confusion wearing with exhaustion. Why, Kana said something in Apache. Nan translated, he says you have empty eyes like his sister had before she died. Says you know sadness. That doesn't explain anything. But Kana was already walking away. Nolan shrugged. Apache ways not your ways. Eat, sleep. Tomorrow is tomorrow. Left with no choice. Clara tended her feet with shaking hands. The food was unfamiliar, some kind of dried meat and corn mixture. But she forced herself to eat. Every survival instinct screamed at her to stay alert, to plan escape. But her body betrayed her. Wrapped in the blanket, she fell into exhausted sleep. She woke to the sound of activity. The camp was already bustling, people going about their daily lives as if white captives were an ordinary occurrence. Perhaps they were. Nolan appeared, handing her a different dress. Soft deerskin, simpler than her torn calico. You work today. Your clothes no good here. Clara wanted to refuse to cling to this last piece of her former life, but practicality won. She changed behind the wickiup, feeling strange in the Apache garment. The work was hard, but not unfamiliar, hauling water, preparing food, the endless tasks of maintaining life. The other Apache women mostly ignored her, though a few watched with open curiosity. She caught glimpses of other captives working elsewhere in the camp, but attempts to approach them were firmly discouraged. Kana kept his distance during the day, but she often felt his eyes on her. In the evening, he appeared at Nolan's wickiup bringing fresh game. He cleaned and prepared it without speaking, occasionally glancing at Clara. Why doesn't he have a wife? Clara finally asked Nolan. A warrior his age. His woman died. White man's sickness 2 winters ago. He grieved long time. Too long. Some say Nan's hands never stop their work. Now he sees you. Thinks maybe spirits send you for reason. I'm not. I can't be anyone's replacement. No one said replacement. Nen's voice was sharp. Apache. No death, no loss, but also no life continues. Heart continues. That night, Clara lay awake thinking about loss, about Eugene Patterson's body in the dust. Dorothy's screams, the children torn from everything familiar. Her own losses seemed small by comparison. A loveless father, men who'd rejected her, a life of emptiness. At least she'd chosen to leave. These people had choice ripped from them by violence. Days passed in routine. Clara learned basic Apache words out of necessity. She discovered that Kana wasn't the only one who spoke. Some English trait in conflict had made bilingualism useful. She also learned that not all captives were treated the same. Some were clearly slaves, worked hard, and watched constantly. Others, especially children, were being absorbed into families who'd lost their own. And then there was her in some strange middle ground she didn't understand. You could run, one of the other captives whispered when they passed at the stream. Martha Williams taken from a different wagon. They don't watch you as close. Where would I go? Clara whispered back. We're days from anywhere. Better to die trying than live like this. But Clara wasn't sure that was true. The life here was hard. Yes, but was it harder than what she'd left, at least here? No one called her plain or worthless. No one tried to trade her for gambling debts. She worked, she ate, she slept, and it was a kind of existence. One evening, Kana brought something besides food, a small carved wooden bird, delicate and beautiful. He set it before her without word or explanation. For you, Nolan translated unnecessarily. Clara picked it up, running her fingers over the smooth wood. Why Kana spoke at length this time. Nolan listened, then translated in pieces. He says you remind him of caged bird he once saw in white man's town. Beautiful, but sad. Wings, but no sky. He says here you could learn to fly. I'm not beautiful, Clara said automatically. Kana frowned, spoke sharply. Nolan smiled slightly. He says you speak lie. Says beauty is not just face. His spirit is courage. You have both. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. She looked at Kana. Really looked at him for the first time. Strong features, yes, but kind eyes, hands that could kill but also create delicate art. A man who saw something in her that 23 years in the white world had never revealed. "I don't understand," she whispered. "No," Nan agreed. "But understanding comes, maybe." That night, Clara clutched the wooden bird and stared at unfamiliar stars. For the first time since the attack, she didn't think about escape. Instead, she wondered what it might mean to learn to fly. The thought terrified her more than captivity ever could. Clara woke to find her ankle wrapped in soft leather strips, cushioned with some kind of moss. The throbbing pain from yesterday's fall had dulled to a manageable ache. She hadn't heard anyone enter during the night, but the careful bandaging spoke of gentle hands. Nin sat outside, grinding corn in the pre-dawn darkness. "Kana fixed your foot," she said without looking up. "He knows healing. Learned from his mother." "I didn't ask." "No, you never ask. Too proud or too afraid." Clara couldn't answer that. She tested her weight on the injured ankle, finding it surprisingly stable. The binding was expertly done, allowing movement while providing support. The camp stirred to life as the sun painted the eastern sky crimson. Clara had learned the rhythms by now. Women starting fires, children running between wiki-ups, men preparing for hunts or raids. But this morning felt different. There was a tension in the air. Conversations held in hushed tones. "War party returns today." Nayland explained, reading Clara Ara's confusion. Many wounded, much work. As the morning progressed, Clara saw the truth of it. Warriors limped into camp, some supported by companions, others carried on makeshift litters. The raid hadn't gone well. Women rushed to tend their men. Children watched with wide, frightened eyes. Clara helped where she could, carrying water, tearing cloth for bandages. Her white skin drew hostile looks from some, but the wounded needed care more than they needed to indulge hatred. She worked in silence, trying to be invisible. Then she saw him, Kana, supporting another warrior, whose leg bore a deep gash. Blood soaked through the temporary binding, leaving a trail in the dust. Without thinking, Clara grabbed clean water and cloths, following them to where the wounded were being treated. An older woman, the band's primary healer, was overwhelmed. She barked orders in Apache, gesturing frantically. Clara didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. She knelt beside the wounded man, pressing cloth against the flowing blood, while the healer tended to someone whose need was even greater. Kana worked beside her, his movement sufficient despite his own exhaustion. Together they cleaned the wound, packed it with herbs Clara didn't recognize. Bound it tight, the warrior groaned, but remained conscious, his eyes moving between his friend and the white woman, helping save his life. Hours passed in a blur of blood and pain. Clara's dress was ruined, her hands stained, her back aching from bending over the wounded, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. These might be her captors, but they were also human beings in pain. White man spotted sickness. His voice roughened. "I could not save. All healing, all medicine, not enough. Smallpox." Clara had seen its ravages, knew its merciless progression. "I'm sorry." He looked at her, then really looked at her. "You have same eyes, not color, but inside empty place where love should live." Clara's breath caught. No one had ever seen that in her before. No one had ever looked deep enough to notice. "My father never loved me," she heard herself say. "No man ever thought I was worth choosing. I was something to be used, traded, tolerated, never treasured." She didn't know why she was telling him this. Maybe because he was outside her world, unable to judge her by its standards. Maybe because he'd already seen the truth anyway. Kana reached into a pouch at his belt, drawing out something small. A bead, she realized, turquoise, perfectly round, strung on a leather cord. He held it out to her. "What is this first gift?" he said carefully. Man gives, woman means I see you. I see. You are worth seeing. Clara's hands trembled as she took the bead. Such a small thing. But in her 23 years, no man had ever given her a gift that wasn't also an obligation. This came with no expectations, no debt to be paid, just acknowledgement of her worth. I don't understand your ways, she whispered. I teach you learn, maybe. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. Come, nail weights. That evening, the camp mourned its dead, with ceremonies Clara observed from a respectful distance. The grief was real raw. Unlike the restrained funerals, she'd known these people howled their pain to the sky, unashamed of tears. Later, Nalin explained some of what Clara had seen, the significance of the rituals, the beliefs about the spirit world, the importance of honoring both life and death. It was so different from the Christianity Clara had been raised with. Yet something in it resonated. Your God teaches shame, Nalin observed. Our spirits teach acceptance, which brings peace. Clara couldn't answer. She'd never known peace despite a lifetime of Christian teaching. Days passed. Clara's ankle healed. She learned more Apache words, understanding growing beyond mere survival needs. Cana began teaching her other things. How to identify edible plants, how to read weather signs, how to move quietly through the brush. Why are you teaching me this? She asked one day as he showed her how to set a simple snare. You need to know to be strong, not depend on others always. It was a foreign concept. Her entire life had been about depending on others. Her father, potential husbands, the kindness of wagon train families. No one had ever thought to teach her independence. But not everyone approved of Cana's attention. She caught the hostile glances, heard the sharp words she was beginning to understand. Some were from women who had lost men to white soldiers, others from warriors who saw her presence as an insult to Apache pride. One evening matters came to a head. A warrior named Kuruk confronted Cana by the central fire, speaking loudly enough for all to hear. Clara caught enough words to understand the accusation that Cana dishonored his sister's memory by favoring a white woman. Cana responded calmly at first. Then, with growing heat, the argument escalated, others taking sides. Clara shrank back, wishing she could disappear, knowing she was the cause of this discord. Then Kuruk spat at her feet, saying something that made several women gasp. Cana moved faster than the sight, knocking the other man to the ground. They grappled in the dirt, a vicious fight that others had to break up. When they were finally separated, both bleeding, the chief spoke. Clara understood little, but Nan translated later. Cana had claimed the right to court her to protect her as his chosen woman. It was a public declaration that changed everything. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She fingered the turquoise bead, trying to make sense of it all. A man was fighting for her. Not for her doughy or her labor or to settle a debt, but for her. The concept was so foreign, she couldn't grasp it. When dawn came, she found Cana by the stream, washing dried blood from his face. His lip was split, one eye swollen shut. You shouldn't have fought, she said. Kuruk is wrong. You are not enemy. You are Clara. The simple statement undid her. She sank to her knees beside him, tears flowing for the first time since her capture. Years of rejection, of being unwanted and unloved, poured out in silent sobs. Cana didn't touch her. That would be improper. But he stayed close. His presence a comfort she'd never known. When her tears finally stopped, he spoke softly in Apache, then translated, I tell you story. Long ago, sky was empty, no stars. Moon was lonely, cried every night. Creator took pity, threw handfuls of light into darkness. Now moon has countless companions. Never alone, he paused. You were moon. Now you have stars. Clara Ara looked at him through swollen eyes. I don't know how to be loved. Then I teach this too. He stood extending his hand again. You are worth teaching. As she took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Not love, not yet. She didn't know what love felt like. But maybe for the first time in her life, the possibility of it. The sun rose over the Apache camp, painting everything golden. And Clara, who had never known love, began to believe she might be worth loving after all. The first Apache word Clara truly understood was Isan woman. But when Kana said it, pointing to her, it sounded different from when others used it. In his voice it carried weight, respect, something she couldn't quite name. She sat with 3 Apache women by the stream, learning to scrape hide. Her hands, soft from years of indoor work, bled from the effort. But she didn't complain. Complaining earned no respect here. Only work did. Hold knife this way, said Awan, the youngest of the women. She had lost her husband in the same raid that brought Clara here. Yet she showed patience with the clumsy white woman. Too steep, you tear too shallow hair stays. Clara adjusted her grip, copying Awan's movements. The work was hard, repetitive, essential. Every hide they prepared meant warmth for winter, trade goods for necessities. Nothing was wasted. You learn quick, said another woman. Nearly it wasn't quite approval, but it was acknowledgement progress. As the days blended into weeks, Clara found herself settling into rhythms she'd never known. Wake before dawn, tend the fire hall water, prepare food work hides, or weave baskets or gather plants. Always something to do. But it was different from the endless drudgery of her father's house. Here work had purpose beyond serving male whims. It sustained life-built community, earned belonging. Kana maintained careful distance during the days, respecting propriety. But in the evenings, he would appear at Nalin's wiki up. With small offerings, a rabbit he'd snared, wild berries, once a handful of piñon nuts. He would sit across the fire from Clara, teaching her words through gestures and patient repetition. Gocha fire 2 water sheen, my woman, the last one he said quietly. When Nan pretended to doze, Clara's cheeks burned, but she repeated it, testing the strange sounds on her tongue. I'm not yours, she said in English. Not yet, he agreed. But maybe if you choose. Choose. There was that word again in her old life. Women didn't choose. They were chosen, or more often assigned. But here Kana waited for her choice, as if it mattered, as if she mattered. One morning shouts erupted from the edge of camp. Clara looked up from grinding corn to see children running, pointing excitedly at approaching riders, not a war party. She'd learned to recognize the difference. These were scouts returning with news. The report spread quickly through camp. White soldiers had been seen 2 days' ride to the east, more than before, building what looked like a permanent fort. The news cast a shadow over the camp. Forts meant more soldiers, more conflict, more death. That night the men held council. Clara couldn't follow the rapid Apache, but she felt the tension. Some voices rose in anger, calling for preemptive strikes. Others counseled out caution, moving camp further from white expansion. Kana returned late, his face troubled. He sat beside Clara without speaking, staring into the dying fire. What will happen? She finally asked. Change comes, always comes. We fight, we run, we die. Still it comes. He picked up a stick, drawing patterns in the dirt. Some say we should trade you other captives. Make peace with soldier chiefs. Clara's heart lurched just when she'd begun to feel not safe. Exactly. But stable. Well, the chief says no. You are under protection now. My protection. Looked at her then, but others not happy. Say I put one white woman above good of people. Maybe they're right. The words tasted bitter. Maybe you should. No. His voice was firm. I choose to choose you. The next days were tense. Clara felt the weight of stares, heard the muttered comments. Some of the women who'd begun accepting her grew cold again. Only Awan maintained her teaching, though even she seemed troubled. It was while gathering plants with Nalen that Clara finally broke. I'm causing trouble, she said, filling her basket with the roots Nalen had shown her. Kana is losing respect because of me. Maybe I should what run? Where you go, foolish girl, Nin's voice was sharp. Back to people who not want you to soldiers who see Apache's woman and shoot first. I don't know. I've never been worth this much trouble before. Nalen stopped walking, turned to face her. You think small, think like her child. Kohan's woman, strong woman who works hard, learns quick, helps others worth fighting for. But I'm white. I'll always be white. Skin is skin. Heart is what matters. Nan resumed walking. You know story of Kana's mother? Clara shook her head. Mexican woman taken in raid when young. Learned our ways, married Kana's father. Became more Apache than many born to it. Raised strong children, honored woman. She glanced at Clara. Skin not Apache heart. Apache. You understand, that evening, Clara watched Kana from across the fire. He was mending a bridle, his hands patient with the leather. Everything he did was careful, deliberate. No wasted motion, no hurried fumbling. She thought of the men she'd known. Her father's clumsy, drunken pawing, McCarty's grasping hands. Even poor Eugene Patterson's nervous gestures. Kana's hands told a different story. They spoke of competence, of care, of strength, used gently. Teach me something, she said suddenly. He looked up, surprised. What you want learn, I don't know. Something Apache, something that helps. He considered, then rose and disappeared into his wiki-up. He returned with a leather pouch and several small items, and all sinew bead soft leather pieces. I teach you make this. He held up a small leather bag, decorated with simple beadwork for medicine, for keeping special things. Every Apache needs one. They worked in companionable silence, Kana guiding her hands when needed. The awl was sharp, the work precise. Clara's first attempts were crooked, but he didn't criticize, just showed her again. My sister made many, he said as they worked. Gave to children, to women who lost theirs. Said empty hands need something to hold. What was her name? Ayana means eternal blossom. His voice softened. She would like you. Same gentle heart. Clara's throat tightened to be compared to someone so clearly loved and mourned. I'm not gentle. I'm just empty. No, not empty. Waiting like seed in winter ground. Looks dead, but life waits inside. He touched the small bag she was working on. See, already you create empty people, not create. As the evening deepened, other women noticed their work. Awan came closer, offering advice on Clara's beating technique. Soon, a small circle formed. Women working on their own projects while sharing the firelight. For the first time, Clara felt not like a captive among enemies, but like a woman among women. When the medicine bag was finished, crooked and simple compared to the others, but complete, Kana nodded. Approval first of many, you keep put something special inside. Clara fingered the turquoise bead at her throat. Special, she'd never owned anything special before. That night, she lay awake thinking. The fort building to the east meant danger change, possibly death. The divide in the camp over her presence might tear the band apart. Kanna's defense of her cost him standing among his people. And yet, for the first time in her 23 years, someone thought she was worth defending, worth teaching, worth choosing. The medicine bag lay beside her. Tangible proof that she could create something valuable with her own hands. She whispered to the darkness, practicing the unfamiliar sounds. My woman, what would it mean to be someone's woman by choice, not transaction? To belong somewhere, not because she was useful or convenient, but because she was wanted. Outside, a coyote howled at the moon. The sound no longer frightened her as it once had. It was just another voice in the night, calling to its kind, looking for connection, looking for home. Clara touched the medicine bag again, then carefully placed the turquoise bead inside her first special thing, her first real choice. The leather was soft against her fingers, still warm from the fire and the work of her hands. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The soldiers, the discord, the uncertain future. But tonight, she had a small bag she'd made herself a bead freely given, and the novel sensation of being worth teaching. It wasn't love yet. She still didn't know what love felt like. But it was something a seed in winter ground, waiting for the right moment to grow. The news arrived with a dust-covered scout, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. Clara didn't need to understand every word to grasp the urgency. Soldiers were coming, not just a patrol, but a full column heading directly for their camp. The reaction was immediate. Women began packing essentials while men prepared weapons and horses. Children, sensing the adults' fear, clung to their mothers. Clara found herself swept into the organized chaos, helping Nolan pack dried meat and medicine bundles. Where will we go? Clara asked. Mountains, hidden valley, soldiers not find. Nolan's hands never stopped moving. Maybe. Kanna appeared already painted for war. The gentle teacher of evening lessons was gone, replaced by a warrior ready to defend his people. He spoke quickly to Nolan in Apache, then turned to Clara. You ride with grandmother. Stay close. If fighting starts, I know. Hide. Clara had learned this much about Apache warfare. Women and children were to be protected, hidden, kept from capture at all costs. But Kanna shook his head. No. If soldiers come for you, go with them. What they not heard, white woman. You be safe. I don't want Clara began, but he was already moving away, organizing the retreat. The band moved out as the sun reached its peak. A long line of horses travois and people on foot. Clara rode behind Nolan on his steady mare. Her few possessions, including the medicine bag, tied in a bundle around them. The organized flight of a people too familiar with being hunted. They'd traveled for hours when the first shots rang out. The soldiers had caught up faster than expected. Warriors wheeled their horses, racing back to hold the line, while the vulnerable continued fleeing. Keep going, someone shouted in Apache. But chaos erupted. Some horses panicked. A travois overturned, spilling precious supplies. Children screamed, and through the dust and confusion, Clara saw blue uniforms cresting a ridge. There, white women there, the English words carried clearly. A group of soldiers spurred toward them, specifically toward the captives. Clara realized with cold certainty they'd been tracked. Someone had reported the wagon train massacre, the taking of white women. This wasn't random patrol. It was a rescue mission. Kanna appeared from nowhere, his horse sliding between Clara and the approaching soldiers. He had his bow drawn, but hadn't fired. Other warriors flanked him, creating a barrier. Stand down. A soldier, a lieutenant by his insignia, shouted, We're here for the white captives. Release them, and we'll withdraw. Clara understood the Apache response without translation. Defiant refusal. These weren't just captives anymore. Some, like the Patterson children, had been adopted into families. Others had integrated in different ways. And what was she? "Ma'am," the lieutenant called past the warriors. "Miss, we're here to rescue you. Come with us and you'll be safe." Safe. The word echoed strangely. Safe from what? From people who taught her skills. From Cana, who saw worth in her to return to what a world that had never wanted her. But before she could respond, Kuruk, the warrior who challenged Cana before, made a decisive move. He grabbed Clara's horse's bridle, yanking her away from Nalin. His words were harsh, angry. She caught enough to understand. He was tired of risking Apache lives for white women. "Take her," he shouted in broken English to the soldiers. "Take all. We not die for them." The betrayal split the Apache ranks. Some agreed with Karu. Others moved to stop him. In the confusion, soldiers pressed forward. Kana's horse reared as he tried to reach Clara. But other warriors, his own people, blocked him. "No." Clara found her voice. "I don't want to go." But her words were lost in the chaos. A soldier grabbed her horse's reins. Others surrounded the captives, forming protective circles. She saw Martha Williams being pulled onto a soldier's horse. Saw children being pried from Apache women's arms. "Please." Clara appealed to the lieutenant. "I want to stay." He looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Ma'am, you're clearly suffering from captivity syndrome. Don't worry. You'll be safe now. You don't understand." But Cana understood. She saw it in his eyes as warriors held him back. Apache warriors choosing their people's safety over his heart. He fought them calling her name. But there were too many. The last thing Clara saw as soldiers led her away was Cana breaking free only to be brought down by his own cousins, not to hurt him, but to save him from a suicidal charge against armed soldiers. The ride to the fort was a blur of tears and protests. The soldiers treated her gently, as one might handle fragile glass. They offered water, food, even a jacket to cover her Apache dress. Their kindness felt like violence. "You're safe now." The Lieutenant Morrison, kept saying, "The savages won't hurt you anymore." "They didn't hurt me," Clara said for the 10th time. "They were teaching me." That's what they do. Another soldier interrupted. "Break white women down. Make them think they're better off with Indians." "Don't worry, miss. Few weeks back in civilization, you'll forget all about it." Fort Defiance was smaller than Clara expected, but bristling with military efficiency. The rescued women were housed in the infirmary, treated by an army doctor, who tisked over their condition. Clara's sun-darkened skin, work-roughened hands, and Apache clothing were noted with professional disapproval. Classic signs of harsh captivity, he told Lieutenant Morrison, but physically healthy, no signs of extreme mistreatment. Clara wanted to scream. The only mistreatment she felt was happening now, as they took her Apache dress and gave her a coarse cotton shift. As they questioned her about her ordeal and refused to hear her true answers. Martha Williams, in the next bed, had no such conflicts. "Thank God," she wept. "Thank God you found us. It was horrible. Horrible." But Clara noticed how Martha clutched a small Apache doll. Noticed the careful beadwork on the moccasins she'd tried to hide. Not everyone was honest about their experiences. Days passed in frustrating sameness. The fort commander, Colonel Bright, interviewed each woman about their captivity. Clara told the truth about Cana's kindness, about learning Apache ways, about wanting to return. His response was patronizing dismissal. "You've been through trauma, Miss Brennan. It's natural to develop feelings for your captors. It's how the mind protects itself. Give it time. How much time, Clara demanded. When will you believe that I knew my own mind? When you're thinking clearly again, which you obviously aren't. If you prefer savage life to Christian civilization. The word savage made her flinch every time. Savage like Nalan, who taught her medicine plants, savage like Awan, who'd shared her grief. Savage like Cana, who'd shown her she had worth. News filtered into the fort. The Apache band had scattered after the soldier attack. Some had been killed in the fighting. Clara pressed for names but got none. Others had fled deeper into the mountains. Cana's fate remained unknown. It's better this way, the fort's chaplain told her. You can return to your family now. Start fresh. Find a proper Christian husband. I have no family, Clara said flatly, and no Christian man ever wanted me. But the machinery of rescue ground on regardless. Arrangements were made to send the women east to Albuquerque, where charitable organizations would help them readjust. Clara felt like she was being erased. Her time with the Apache dismissed as an unfortunate interlude. The night before their departure, she stood at the fort's walls looking toward the mountains. Somewhere out there, if he lived. Cana might be looking back. Did he think she'd chosen to leave? Did he understand she'd been taken as surely as she'd been taken from the wagon train? I'm sorry, she whispered to the darkness. My son? No, that wasn't right. Shehin, my husband, but they'd never had that ceremony. What was the word for a man who'd shown her she was worth loving, even if she'd never had the chance to love him back? Lieutenant Morrison found her there. Miss Brennan, you should be resting. Long journey tomorrow. I don't want to go. He sighed. I know it seems that way now, but trust me. In a few months, you'll be grateful we found you. You'll have your life back. What life? Clara turned to face him. You know nothing about my life, about what I left behind, about what I found with them. I know you're a white woman who belongs with her own kind. My own kind sold me for gambling debts. The words came out harsh, bitter. My own kind told me I was worthless. The only kindness I've ever known came from people you call savages. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. I'm sorry you've had bad experiences, but that doesn't mean just leave me alone. Clara turned back to the mountains. You've already taken everything else? He left, and Clara stayed at the wall until full darkness fell in her pocket, hidden from the soldiers' searches. She still had the medicine bag she'd made inside. The turquoise bead rested against the leather, her only proof that once briefly someone had seen her as precious. Tomorrow she would be forced back into a world that had no place for her. But tonight, she could remember a warrior's gentle hands teaching her to be an old woman's patient instruction. The Apache word for worthy applied to her for the first time in her life. I have known love, she whispered, revising her old lament. Just once, just briefly, but I have known it. The stars offered no comfort, but she didn't need them to. The knowledge was enough that somewhere in the vast frontier, a man had fought to keep her, had seen her truly, had offered her a different life. Even if she never found it again, she would always have that. They could take her from the Apache, but they couldn't take the Apache from her heart. The attack came under a blood moon. 3 months after Clara's forced return to Fort Defiance, she'd been moved to quarters with other rescued women, awaiting transport east, that kept being delayed by Apache raids on supply routes. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very people she longed to return to were keeping her here. She woke to gunfire and war cries. The fort's bells clanging alarm. Through her small window, she saw figures scaling walls overwhelming sentries. Not a rate for horses or supplies. This was something bigger. Get to the chapel, Mrs. Hartley, the matron assigned to watch the women, herded them toward supposed safety. But Clara held back, her heart pounding with impossible hope. The attack was coordinated, hitting multiple points simultaneously. Warriors poured through breached defenses while others kept soldiers pinned with arrow fire in the chaos. Clara noticed something. They weren't killing indiscriminately. This was a mission with purpose. Then she saw him, Kana fighting his way through the courtyard searching. Their eyes met across the melee, and the world stopped. Clara. His voice cut through everything. She ran not away from danger, but toward it. Toward him. A soldier tried to grab her, pull her to safety, but she twisted free. An arrow whistled past her head. She didn't care. Kana met her halfway, catching her as her legs nearly gave out. "You came," she gasped. "You came for me." "Always come," he said fiercely. "You are mine. I am yours." But their reunion was cut short. Soldiers were regrouping, forming defensive lines. Other warriors called urgently in Apache. They had to go. "Now can you ride?" Kana asked. "Yes," he whistled sharply. A horse appeared. Her horse, the mare she'd ridden with Nalin. Someone had kept it for her. The simple thoughtfulness of it made her eyes burn. "Stop her," Lieutenant Morrison's voice rang out. "She's being taken again." "No!" Clara shouted back, already mounting. "I'm choosing." Kana swung up behind her, his arms secure around her waist. Around them, warriors provided cover as they raced for the broken gate. Gunfire erupted. Deadly close, she felt. Kana Jerk heard his sharp intake of breath. "Are you right?" he commanded. They burst through the fort's perimeter into the desert night. Other riders flanked them. She recognized some faces in the moonlight. Awan was there, fierce determination on her face. They'd come for other captives too, she realized. Not conquest, but rescue. Miles fell behind them before they slowed. Only then did Clara feel the wetness soaking through her back. Blood. Kana's blood. "You're hurt." "Not bad," he said, but his voice was strained. They stopped at a predetermined gathering point, a box canyon with water and cover. Nan was there with medicine supplies, as if she'd known they'd be needed. Her weathered face cracked into the first smile Clara had ever seen from her. "Stubborn girl. Took you long enough to come home." Home. The word broke something inside Clara. She helped Kana down, saw the bullet furrow across his ribs. Not fatal, but painful and bleeding freely. "Let me," she said, reaching for the medicine supplies. Her hands remembered Nalin's teachings as she cleaned and packed the wound. Kana watched her work, his eyes soft despite the pain. "You kept the knowledge," he observed. "I kept everything." She touched the medicine bag still at her throat, hidden beneath the fort's issued clothing. "I never stopped being who you taught me to be." Others filtered in, warriors reporting success, families reuniting. Not all the captives had chosen to come. Martha Williams had screamed for soldiers to save her. But the Patterson children were there, clinging to their adopted Apache mother. Choice. It all came down to choice. As dawn approached, they prepared to move deeper into the mountains. The fort would send pursuit, but the Apache knew path soldiers couldn't follow. Still, it meant a hard life ahead. Constant movement, scarce resources, always watching for attack. "You understand?" Kana asked as she helped him mount. "This life not easy, always running, always danger. Not what white women expect. White women expect to be sold to pay debts," Clara said firmly. "White women expect to be property. I choose freedom. I choose you." He caught her hand at Fort. "I thought you chose them. Thought you wanted their world. Never. They took me just like before. Only this time, I knew what I was losing." She squeezed his fingers. "I told them I wanted to stay. They said I was mad that I didn't know my own mind. You know I know is enough." The band moved through the day pushing hard despite exhaustion. Clara rode with Kana supporting him when his strength flagged. The bullet wound wasn't serious, but blood loss and effort took their toll. That night camped in a hidden valley. The reality of their situation became clear. The raid had cost them. 3 warriors dead, several wounded, precious supplies left behind in the speed of retreat, and the fort would demand retribution. "War comes now," the chief said grimly. "No more small peace. They will hunt us." Arguments erupted. Some blamed Kana for bringing trouble by insisting on retrieving Clara. Kuruk surprisingly defended him this time. "She proved herself," he said gruffly. "Came willing, 10's wounded. Apache in heart, if not blood." It wasn't full acceptance, but it was progress. Clara worked among the wounded using skills Nalan had taught her. Each warrior she helped was one less voice against her presence. Late that night, she sat with Kana by a small fire. His fever had broken the wound, beginning to heal clean. Around them, the camp settled into exhausted sleep. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why risk everything to come for me?" It was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then you know the sickness that took my sister?" Clara nodded. "I was with War Party when it came. Gone many days. Came back, found her dying." She asked for water. Simple thing, water. But I had to go to stream, fill container, bring back those moments. She died while I walked alone, asking for water I couldn't give fast enough. He stared into the fire. "Since then, I think what is worth fighting for. What matters? Pride, territory, revenge, all nothing. Only this matters. Being there, not letting go, not being too late. So you came for me. Would always come. You are not my sister." Not her spirit returned. "You are Clara. Different pain, different strength, but same truth, worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for." Clara's eyes blurred. No one had ever thought her worth any of those things. "I still don't know how to love properly. I've never had anyone show me." Then we learned together. Apache way is patience. I wait. You learn. We find path. She leaned against his uninjured side, carefully. "What if the soldiers catch us? What if your people decide I'm too much trouble? What if sun doesn't rise? What if eagles forget to fly?" He touched her face gently. "Cannot live in what if, only in what is. What is? You are here. I am here. We breathe same air. See same stars is enough for tonight. Teach me to say it in Apache. I love you." "Not ready yet," he said, but smiled to soften it. "First, learn smaller words. Nigo, son, you are my woman. Say." She tried mangling the pronunciation. He corrected patiently, over and over, until she got close. "Good. Now nil ched shall. I will go with you." Important words means choosing every day. They practiced until her throat was raw from the unfamiliar sounds. But each word felt like a promise, a bridge between who she'd been and who she was becoming. A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness, that same lonely sound she'd heard on countless nights. But now Kana howled back, soft and playful. And the coyote answered. And suddenly, it wasn't lonely at all. Just creatures calling to each other across the darkness, confirming they weren't alone. "See," he said. "Everyone looks for same thing. Connection pack, belonging. You found yours." Clara fingered the medicine bag at her throat, felt the turquoise bead inside. Such a small thing to build a life on. But maybe all lives were built on small things. A word of kindness, a patient teaching a choice to see worth where others saw none. Tomorrow would bring pursuit danger, an uncertain future with a hunted people. But tonight, as she sat under familiar stars with a man who'd bled for her freedom, learning words of love in a language that had no word for worthless. "Nigu-san," she whispered again, getting it right this time. He confirmed. "Yes, always. Yes." The fire burned low, but neither moved to build it up. Sometimes darkness was better for truth-telling. Sometimes love needed shadow to grow strong before it faced the light. And in that shadow, Clara, who had never known love, began to understand its shape, not in grand gestures or pretty words, but in patience and teaching. In the simple act of coming back for someone when the whole world said to let them go. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The seasons turned, and with them, Clara's understanding of what home meant. 6 moons had passed since Cana brought her back from the fort. 6 moons of running, hiding, surviving, but also 6 moons of belonging in ways she'd never imagined possible. The band had settled temporarily in a hidden canyon far from soldier patrols. Clara knelt by the stream washing clothes alongside Awan and Naeli. Her hands, once soft and pale, were now brown and capable. The Apache words came naturally now, flowing between the women like water over stones. "Soldiers were seen 3 days south," Awan said quietly. "Scouts say they search for a still." "They always search," Naeli replied. "But mountains keep secrets better than white men track them." Clara wrung out a child's shirt, remembering how foreign this work had seemed once. Now it was simply life. The rhythm of survival that bound them all together. She'd proven herself through season after season. No longer the rescued captive, but a functioning member of the band. Clara, a child's voice, called Little Shash, whose name meant bear, ran toward her with something clutched in his hand. "Look what I found." It was an arrowhead perfectly formed. Clara examined it with proper appreciation. "Very good. You have sharp eyes?" The boy beamed and scampered off. A year ago, the children had hidden from her. Now she was simply another aunt, another teacher, another protector in their small world. "He likes you," Awan observed. "All children do. You will make good mother." The word sent an unexpected flutter through Clara's stomach. Mother. It was something she'd never dared imagine for herself. Not in her old life where she was unwanted goods. Not here where each day was uncertain. That evening, Cana returned from a hunting party bringing fresh deer. Clara helped with the butchering, their movements coordinated from months of working together. They didn't need words for this anymore. She knew when he'd reach for the skinning knife. He knew when she'd need the scraping tool. "Soldiers are building another fort," he told her later as they sat by their fire. "Closer. Soon we must move again. Where will we go? West, maybe south. Chief councils with other bands, maybe join together. Be stronger." Clara heard what he didn't say. That joining other bands meant new dynamics, new challenges to her acceptance. Some Apache groups had never taken white captives, would never understand one choosing to stay. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Fear is wise sometimes, keeps us careful." He studied her face in the firelight. "You fear?" "Yes, but not of soldiers or new bands." She struggled to find words. "I fear losing this. Losing you. Waking up to find it was all a dream." "Not dream." He took her hand, traced the calluses that proved her work, her belonging. "See real. You are real. We are real." That night the chief called council. Clara sat with the women, but her status had shifted. She understood the discussions now could follow the debate. The news was grim. Soldiers pressed from the east. Mexican forces threatened from the south. Other tribes displaced by white expansion competed for the same scarce resources. "We cannot fight all enemies." The chief said, "Must choose battles, choose survival." Some advocated for negotiation with the Americans. Others pushed for alliance with bands still actively fighting. Kana spoke for moving deeper into the mountains, finding places too harsh for soldiers to follow. Then Kuruk stood. Clara tensed. He'd accepted her presence, but rarely supported it. "There's another way," he said. "Some might speak for us. Say soldiers wrong to chase, wrong to kill. Maybe." He looked directly at Clara. Maybe one who lived both worlds could speak, could tell truth they might hear. The council erupted. Send Clara as an envoy. Trust their words to a white woman. But as Clara listened, she heard something beyond the skepticism, desperate hope. They were exhausted, worn down by constant flight. "If there was even a chance, I'll go," she heard herself say. If the council wishes, if Kana agrees, the debate raged long into the night. Finally, dawn brought decision. Clara would go accompanied by Kana and 2 other warriors to the nearest town. They would attempt to reach sympathetic ears to argue for the band's right to exist in peace. The town of Willow Springs lay 2 days' ride through hostile territory. Clara dressed carefully for the journey, her Apache clothing covered by a traded white woman's cloak, her sun-darkened skin hidden beneath a bonnet. She looked like what she was, someone caught between worlds. They camped the first night in a grove of cottonwoods. Kana was quiet, tension radiating from him. This went against every instinct, walking into the enemy's stronghold, trusting to words when only strength had ever protected them. "You don't have to come," Clara said. "I could go alone." "No." His response was immediate. "Where you go, I go always, even into a town full of people who want you dead. Especially there." He touched her face. "You think I let you face wolves alone?" The next day brought them to Willow Springs' outskirts. The plan was simple. Clara would enter first. Find the territorial judge known to have some sympathy for Indian rights. The warriors would wait hidden, ready to flee if things went wrong. But plans rarely survive first contact with reality. Clara had barely entered the main street when she heard her name called. Not her Apache name, but her white name, spoken in shocked recognition. "Clara Brennan. By God, it is you." She turned to find Samuel McCarty, the man her father had tried to sell her to. He looked prosperous now, his store apparently thriving. His eyes took in her appearance, the Apache beadwork visible at her throat, her weathered hands, the way she stood ready to run. "We thought you were dead," he said, approaching. "Your father drank himself into the grave last winter, crying about losing you to savages." Her father was dead. Clara waited for some feeling about this news. Found only emptiness, that life was too far away now. "I need to speak with Judge Harrison." She said, "It's urgent." "Judge Harrison, what could you, Clara? What's happened to you? You look like you've gone native." She lifted her chin. "I have, and I need to speak for my people." McCarty's face went through several expressions. Shock, disgust, a peculiar kind of anger. "Your people, those murdering savages." "Clara, you're clearly still affected by your ordeal. Come with me. We'll get you proper care." "No." She backed away. "I'm not captive anymore. I chose." His voice rose. "No decent white woman chooses to live with Indians. You're sick, confused. Someone needs to take responsibility for you." He reached for her arm. Clara reacted with Apache-trained instincts. Dodging his grasp and drawing the knife at her belt, Marty stumbled back, shouting for help. "Indian lover, she's armed. Someone stop her." People emerged from buildings. Clara saw hands reaching for weapons, heard voices calling for the sheriff. This had gone wrong so fast, so completely. She ran. Behind her, shouts escalated. "Apache spy, stop her." Clara fled through twisting alleys, her Apache training serving her well. But this wasn't open country. Streets led to dead ends. Faces appeared in windows. Soon they'd have her boxed in. A hand grabbed her, yanked her into shadow. Cana, who'd never been far despite the plan. With him were the other warriors. Horses ready, go, one hissed. They mounted and rode gunshots, cracking behind them. Clara bent low over her horse's neck. Cana beside her, the town falling away into dust and failed hopes. They didn't stop until full darkness. Finally, watering horses at a hidden spring. No one pursued. The townspeople weren't eager to chase Apache warriors into the desert, but the mission had failed utterly. "I'm sorry," Clara gasped, still breathing hard. "I ruined everything." "No." Kana's voice was firm. "Town ruined everything. They see what they want to see, Apache or white. No between." The other warriors were less forgiving. She'd endangered them all with her naive belief that words could bridge the divide. The ride back to the band was silent, heavy with failure. But when they arrived, the chief's response surprised her. "You tried. Takes courage to walk into enemy camp with only words, not your failure. Theirs." That night, as the band prepared to move again, Clara sat alone at the edge of camp. The stars that had once seemed so foreign now felt like old friends, constant in their distant light. Nan found her there. "You grieve," I thought. "I hoped I could help be a bridge. But there's no bridging, this is there. They'll always see Apache as savage. Always see me as traitor. Maybe not." The old woman settled beside her. "But bridge is not made in one day. Takes many stones, many hands. You placed stone today, failed." "Yes, but stone was placed." Cana appeared from the darkness. Something in his hands. A blanket. Not just any blanket, but one woven with a pattern that marked a married woman. Clara's breath caught. "Chief says we'd leave at dawn," he said. "Travel far, find new place. Hard journey." He paused, harder alone. Clara understood. He was asking in the Apache way, not just to be his woman for now, but his wife for whatever came next. To bind herself fully to this life, this people, this man, who'd shown her what love looked like. She thought of the town's reaction, of Marty's disgust of a world that would never accept what she'd chosen. Then she thought of Cana bleeding to bring her home, of Nolan's patient teaching of children, who called her aunt and meant it. "Nilches shall," she said carefully. "I will go with you." He wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, marking her as his wife in the eyes of the band. Such a simple gesture, but it meant everything. Acceptance, belonging, love, that asked nothing but her presence. "My Clara Ara," he said in Apache, then in English. "My wife, my choice, my husband," she replied in both languages. "My home, my heart." The band moved at dawn. As promised, Clara rode beside Cana, wearing her marriage blanket despite the heat. Behind them, Willow Springs would spread its story of the white woman gone savage, the traitor who chose Apache ways. Let them talk. She'd found something worth more than their approval. A love that saw her truly. A people who judged her by her actions, not her skin. A life built on choice rather than transaction. The sun rose over the desert, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. Clara touched the medicine bag at her throat, felt the turquoise bead that started it all. Such a small thing to build a life on, such a perfect thing. "Where do we go?" she asked Cana as they rode. "Forward," he said simply. "Always forward together." She smiled, adjusting her blanket, feeling the weight and warmth of belonging. Once she had cried to the stars that she had never known love. Now she rode into the unknown with a heart so full it might burst. Love looked nothing like she'd imagined in her father's cold house. It looked like patience and teaching, like fighting against impossible odds, like choosing each other, even when the whole world said no. It looked like home. And as the Apache band disappeared into the vast frontier, Clara finally understood she hadn't lost herself in choosing this life. She'd found the woman who'd always existed beneath the rejection and emptiness, waiting for someone to see her worth. Kanina had given her all his love as promised, but more than that, he'd taught her she was worthy of it. The desert swallowed them, keeping their secrets, protecting their choice. And Clara rode on, no longer the woman who had never known love, but the woman who'd chosen it above all else.